That's great. Give everyone a chance to acknowledge the recording is in progress now. So it's just 7 p.m. Good evening. I think we'll get going here. So I am Leanne Wallace, the Director for Area G of the Regional District of Nanaimo. Thanks for attending this evening to discuss the current Stage 4 watering restrictions on the River's Edge water system. I'd like to first respectfully acknowledge that we're conducting this meeting, albeit virtually, on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. The format for this evening is that we do have a presentation from Mr. Murray Walters, who's the Manager of Water Services with the Regional District of Nanaimo. And we're also very fortunate to have the new General Manager of Engineering and Utilities join us as well this evening, and that's Ms. Ellen Tien, and she wants to give a wave. There we are. So format is, once I think we make it through the presentation, then we're happy to take any questions. The format for that, you can either type them into the chat, or we can use the good old method of putting up your hand, and we'll do our best to acknowledge a speaker's order for that. So without any further delay, I'll hand it over to Mr. Murray Walters. Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne. It might take me a second here to get my screen organized, so bear with me. I'm not used to having one monitor. Who knows what's going to happen. Hopefully everybody can see that PowerPoint.
Yes.
Excellent. Now it's filling the screen. Okay.
Perfect.
So yeah, thanks for inviting me to come and chat with you, Leanne. I thought what I would do is I put together a really short presentation just on some basic facts about your water system and how we got into the situation that we're in now and how we're going to get out of it, and general information kind of stuff. We'll go through that, show you some graphs and things. It's going to be non-technical, and hopefully lots of time you can ask questions, and I'll try my hardest to answer when we get to that point. So the first slide that you see there, this is just a general knowledge slide about your water service area. It's called the Englishman Water Services Area formally. Unfortunately, that's not a very good name because it gets confused with the Englishman River Water Service just across the river in the city of Parksville, which has nothing to do with your water system. And we're actually this year making an effort to change the name of it from the Englishman River Water Service Area to the River's Edge Water Service Area, just to avoid confusion for the next 20 years. So hopefully we'll get through that sometime this year. So your community water system provides potable water and fire protection water to the River's Edge community. And you put that in quotes just because I know that's not the official name of it. Your system was constructed in 2004. It's our newest water system. Of the 9 water systems that I manage, this one is the newest. And it's also the most modern. It has all the bells and whistles and bits of materials and things that you would have in a brand new water system if you had one. So it's a good position to be in. There's a total of 157 connections on the system, which makes it quite a large water system in the RDN's stable of water systems. The largest system we have is in the Noose with about 2,500. And the smallest one is in Yellow Point, and it only has 5 connections. And then there's a few that are between 150 and 300 mixed in there. All quite similar. And
find a spot to sit for dinner.
Somebody's not on mute, but hopefully they'll get on mute.
Murray, you're muted. Can I hear you?
Hi, Sherry. If you could get you to just mute your screen or mute your device, that would be helpful. Thank you. Go ahead.
So I'll just keep going on this theme. Your water system is based on.
Still cannot hear you.
Sorry.
I can hear Murray from here.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Is everybody else hearing me? Any thumbs up out there? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So there's 2 groundwater wells down in Rascal Lane that are the source of water for your water system. 2 and 3, we call them. And they're quite productive. I'll get into exactly what water they pump into your system here in a slide or two. And there's one reservoir up real high on Stonefly Close that provides water to all the houses by gravity. So we don't pump the water to any houses. It all just runs by gravity from the reservoir. This is a picture that you're probably all fairly familiar with because you all live in the area, but the blue shaded area sets out the boundaries of your water service area. So as you can see, there's bits and pieces of other things that sort of intrude into the system that aren't part of the water system. And those people get their water from private wells or other sources. Pretty good layout of the land there, and you can see if you look closely, the blue lines that run down the middle of the screen are the water mains that provide the water up and down the street. This is a chart from a recent study we had done that shows sort of the lay of the land under the ground as far as where your water comes from. And it's a little bit hard to see. I'll try and put my mouse over the appropriate spots, but there's 3 aquifers where you all live. There's the upper aquifer, there's the middle aquifer here, and there's the lower aquifer down here. All of the production wells that the RDN runs, and I would hazard a guess that almost all the private wells that people run in the neighborhood are in this middle aquifer. The upper aquifer, not super productive, and it's too shallow to be considered potable water without a bunch of treatment. And the lower aquifer down here is very high in chlorides and other minerals. So if you had a well down there, you would know by the smell, I think, if not the taste. So our wells are shown over here. If you can read the fine print, PW2 and PW3 over on the right-hand side. Those are our wells, and they've been completed in this middle aquifer here. And there's some observation wells and things that do look at the level in the lower aquifer and stuff. But for all intents and purposes, your potable water is in this middle aquifer here. And we can talk about that a bit more in a minute. But the other things that are on this diagram are these things called aquitards. And you think when something's called a tard, it probably retards something, and that's the whole thing about an aquitard. It's non-permeable, so it keeps the upper aquifer separate from the middle aquifer and separate from the lower aquifer. So it's a relatively non-permeable layer. This is a graph showing what the production is and was from the wells in your neighborhood. The red line, I don't know if you can see, I guess you can probably see the legend on the side. It's underneath the pictures on my screen, but the red line is the current numbers, and you can see it's got a real steep increase up well past the 10,000 cubic meters number in April, May, which is a little bit unusual. And you can see the great shape of the previous year, couple of years shapes where we, the folks that live there really cut their water consumption and, made a big difference, tried to make that curve as steep as possible. Excuse me, my phone's ringing. Get rid of that. So the red line gives you an indication of just, what kind of water production was happening when we got into this situation where we couldn't keep the reservoir full. And, that is an awful lot of water. If you look at the difference between the 2020 curve and the 2021 curve, that's a lot of water. So we think we've turned the corner on that anyway. So to get into the meat of why we're in stage 4 watering restrictions. So, we have normal high water use in summer, which is typical. And your water system, you guys are very high water users, but within the capacity of our system. But what we found is we couldn't keep the reservoir full, basically. We couldn't fill it up overnight. And those of you who aren't familiar with how a water utility works, we have the reservoir full, say at 5 o'clock in the morning, and people get up and get ready to go to work or whatever, and they sprinkle their lawns when they're allowed to, and they draw that reservoir down, and then we fill it like crazy all day. And then the evening when people come home from work, water usage goes way up again, sprinkling starts again for a couple of hours. And then nighttime sets in at 9 o'clock, people go to bed, water usage goes down, and we pump as much water as we can all night to get that reservoir back to the position it was in at 5 in the morning. And normally, this time of the year, we normally run our wells about 80 to 85% of the day. So there's about 10 to 15% of the day where the wells don't normally run. When we got into this problem a couple of weeks ago, we were running the wells 24 hours and still not catching up. So some good news for the people who live there. You all have taken, this watering restriction thing to heart. And for the past couple of weeks since we've been on stage 4, the wells have only been running about 50% of the day. So a massive change in water usage, which is just the ticket. So the second bullet there, and what really triggers us to go to stage 4 watering restrictions when there's not like a big leak or something like that, is we look at the water level in our wells, and we make sure that they're sort of staying within a normal range. And when this started to happen and we noticed the reservoir wasn't filling up, we went and and got the levels from the wells. So they're not connected to any system or anything. We have to go and manually download a level logger that's in each one. And we do that once a week. And when they went and got the data from the wells, the level was much, much, much below normal. And you'll see a chart in a minute that shows that. So that was really the thing that brought us to stage 4 restrictions, and very quickly. And we started reading all the meters in the neighborhood, all 150 of them. We read them every day for 4 or 5 days. And you know, not only did we see a lot of reduction in water usage as soon as we went to stage 4, but we found at least 5 major leaks. And most of them were in the 30 to 40 cubic meters per day level, which is a massive amount of water. Our system can make about 170 cubic meters a day of water. So if we have 5 leaks that are leaking about that much when people's irrigation are turned on, that's the biggest reason why we couldn't keep the reservoir full. So those are pretty significant leaks, and they've all been fixed. Everybody was pretty cooperative once we sort of pointed out to them that they had a massive leak. Not everybody was, but almost everybody was. And that's really important. I mean, it's your resource, you own it, you don't want to waste it. So it's really great when everybody cooperates with that. And it's a lot of work to read meters every day as well. So it's nice when people respond to that. So the big question that everybody wants to know is, when can we go back to stage 3? And really, we're looking at the level in the wells. And when that level trend returns to sort of a seasonal norm, so not like a winter norm or anything like that, but a seasonal norm, we'll be quick to go back to stage 3 again when that happens. So that's really the trigger. And we typically download the well levels every Wednesday. So we'll have a look at it this week and see where it's at. And you'll see the trend in the slide here. It's definitely recovering, which is great. The well not recovering would be an awful thing. So this is PW2. So there's 2 wells, PW2 and PW3. This is about as technical as we're going to get. So if you look at the orange smear on the screen there, that's 2020, and the gray smear is 2021. And you can see just above the 618 mark there, where, you know, the well level was just dropping. There was no recovery when the wells were shut off, and the level just took a dive. And you can see once we started the stage 4 restrictions, it started to come back up again. So I'm hopeful when we download the wells this week, we'll see that trend continue and we'll be ready to go back to stage 3 again. This one's a little harder to see, but the same colors. This is PW3 data, and you can see, you know, it was actually shutting off a tiny little bit down here, but the level was just dropping like a rock. And normally it just drops for a very short period, generally in August, and then it recovers again when the end of the hot weather happens. So, or a few people fix a big leak, which I think might have happened then too. But anyway, you can see from this sort of the trends that we follow to decide when we need to do more enhanced watering restrictions. And in a normal year, you know, the wells have enough capacity that we run between 80 and 90% of the day in the peak water using months to keep the reservoir full, which is fine. And I know there's a lot of interest in private wells in the excuse me, in your neighborhood. This is a screenshot from the provincial government's GWells database, and I'm sure all of you recognize your neighborhood in here. In this area here, I'm going around with my cursor. Every one of those blue dots is a well, and 2 of them on Rascal Lane are our production wells, and all the rest are private wells for people. So there's a lot of private wells in the area, and there's a lot of private wells in the greater area generally. I mean, away from your neighborhood as well. So lots of straws in the aquifer, as we like to say. Just an idea, give you an idea of some of the things that we're doing in your water system in 2021 and 2022. So the issue with water in your subdivision is not so much that we don't have enough of it. It's that the chloride content in your water is trending upwards, which suggests to the hydrogeologists, and those are the professionals who understand a lot better than I do the movement of water under the ground. They think that's because water from that lower aquifer that I described earlier is migrating into the middle aquifer, and it's got a lot of chloride in it. And so you're seeing your chloride content in your water slowly trending upwards. So as a consequence of that, we thought a couple of years ago, we need to start looking for alternative sources of water or ways to combat that. And way back in 2004, there was a well drilled in the area that wasn't used, and it's in the lower aquifer, and they never really did any pump testing on that well. So we thought to start in 2021, just to prove that that water really isn't very good, as the hydrogeologist would suggest, we hired a hydrogeologist and a pumping well driller, and we went down to PW1 and we pumped it really hard for a couple of weeks to see if the mineral content would decrease if we pumped enough water out of it, and it didn't. It just got worse. So from the hydrogeologist's perspective, that means, you know, that well is no good for drinking water unless you want to spend a lot of money on treating it. There's a lot of water there, but it's got a lot of chloride in it and a lot of iron and a lot of other things that we don't want to have in our drinking water. So we moved on from there, and we've got the hydrogeologist doing some work on figuring out, you know, what else can we do to make a more sustainable model from a water quality perspective. And I think they've come up with a plan, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But the other thing that we've done that kind of affects your water system and all the other water systems is that this is the first year after a few years of development that we actually have a 20-year asset renewal plan for our water systems. So we're looking ahead at when things get to their end of life, when they need to be replaced due to wear and tear based on, you know, the typical lifetimes of equipment. Fortunately for you guys, you know, the stuff that's buried in the ground is good for a long time yet. It's pretty new and it's modern. Sort of the next things that are going to come up on your system for replacement is the control equipment that turns the wells on and off and looks after the reservoir level and stuff like that. That's due to be replaced next year. So that's the first thing that's going to happen there. Which brings us to 2022. So the big thing in your neighborhood in 2022 is this water supply planning exercise. What we've got from the hydrogeologist is a sort of a conceptual design of a plan they have that, you know, will ensure that we have good quality water for, you know, as long as they like to predict it will go on. So, you know, 50-year and longer time frame. What that's going to involve is drilling probably 4 more wells around the neighborhood on parkland and on crown land, and connecting them all to the system so that we can pump the same amount of water essentially, but at a slower pace from a wider range of well heads. And the hydrogeologists say that that will be a key thing in keeping that chloride contamination of the water down and make the wells last for a long time. So we've got to further develop that program a little bit through this year, get it in the budgets for the next few years, figure out how much it's going to cost, and then we'll have to come to you guys, the residents, for approval to borrow money to build that on your behalf. And in rough numbers, it's going to be something like $1 million. But you know, that's me holding my thumb up in the wind. Not enough work's been done really to see what the cost of it's going to be. But that's the next big thing for your water system. I mentioned there's the control system, or SCADA as it's called, Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. That system is original 2004. And if any of you are running a computer from 2004, you're probably not having very much luck following this webinar, but computer stuff gets old and it needs to be replaced. So that's going to happen in 2022. And we're also going to put in a backup chlorination system. So your water is only disinfected with chlorine at in the reservoir, and we've been the sort of standard design for water systems now is to have a backup chlorination system in place so that if you lose your pump, you can still make potable water. So that's what we're moving towards in all of our water systems starting in 2022. And just one last slide, I think, before we get into questions. This is from our website, the rdn.bc.ca. It's the Get Involved page on the website. And there's 2 things to draw your attention to here. Team Water Smart, there's lots of good information there on how to save water and how to farm, you know, using good soil management and modern irrigation techniques. There's lots of helpful things there. And there's information on our rebates for rainwater collection and all that kind of stuff. And second of all, there's an RDN, wildfire resiliency page on the Get Involved page. And there's a lot of outreach about to happen on interface fire planning and that kind of thing that the RDN Fire Service group is going to be doing in August. And they're going to be holding some public meetings and soliciting people's opinions on things and trying to do some education on how to fireproof your properties. And I think that would be a good thing to take in for a lot of the people in your neighborhood, since you do tend to have lots of wooded lots and things like that. So check that out on the website if you have a chance, and try and participate in the working groups that are going to happen in the next few weeks. I think it will be good. And with that, that's all I got. So happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Murray. Thanks for sharing. We can see everybody then. And so what I'll do is I'll just give people a chance here to either put their hand up or type into the chat. And your tiny little heads on my tiny little screen. So it'll just take me a minute. I think the first hand I can see is Mr. Randy White. If you wanted to go ahead, Randy, and ask your question. Thank you. And you're muted. You're still muted. There you go.
There. I'm sorry, I missed your name.
Murray.
Murray, yes. I kind of knew that, but I didn't want to embarrass myself, to tell you the truth. Back to that map of the wells in River's Edge. The people who have, I understood you weren't allowed to have a well in here because we're on a water system. Is that the people who have wells? Are they also on the watering system? Do they have access to both? And what's the consequence of that?
Yeah, so I guess answer the second question first. There are a lot of people, a lot of wells, a lot of properties in your community that have their own private well on their property, and they are connected to our water system as well. And we hope and we assume that they're, they're not connected. The two water systems are not connected, and we've never seen any evidence that they are. It's not against the law to drill a well on your own property in that area. However, it is against the original building scheme of the subdivision. So there's no legal way that the RDN can stop people from drilling wells. The only way, according to extensive legal advice we got on this several years ago, is if a bunch of residents decide they want to stop another resident from drilling a well, they can take them to court using the power of the building scheme, the original building scheme, and try and stop them that way. I suspect that would be an expensive process, but that's the sort of the overall situation in well land. Our big problem, if you want to call it that, with private wells is not so much that people have them, but that they might tend to overpump them, which affects our aquifer if they're in if they're in the middle aquifer, and if they happen to be in the lower aquifer, that their well is somehow potentially causing cross contamination between the two aquifers, which shouldn't happen if it's done right, but you never know. So those are the two concerns we have with the private well people.
That's why I asked the question. Just to talk about. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And if we can go to the chat, we have a question there, which I think then if we could, after the chat question, go to Doug and then to Tim. So the question in the chat is, thanks for organizing. I learned about this from a neighbor. Why was there no communication by the RDN? Maybe we could talk about the Voyant alert system and a few other things. And I think it's the same. Yes, Marilyn, what is the trend of the increase in private wells drilled for the last 5 years? So Murray, if you don't mind, I'll just talk a little bit about how this meeting came to be.
Sure.
And then you can take it from there. So via the community Facebook group, there were a number of technical questions, concerns that came out when the stage 4 watering was implemented. I did my best to work with Ellen, I think in her first week at the RDN, if I'm not mistaken, her second week, and Murray was on vacation that week. And so we were going back and forth. I was funneling questions from residents through to the RDN, taking answers, posting it there. I do have a small email distribution group that I use in here. And I did ask that people could also talk to your neighbor, basically go next door. Unfortunately, that is the that is the best we could do in I think 5 days notice, right? So that's how we got here. But what's important to also recognize is this meeting is recorded, so we will be able to share this link, and certainly my objective is to ensure that all 157 properties in River's Edge are aware that this meeting happened, what was discussed at this meeting, and so that as a community we can certainly raise our level of knowledge about the water system and raise our level of hopefully participation in the water conservation needed while we're in stage 4 as the wells recover. And so Murray, if you can take the next part of that question, maybe can you talk about the buoyant system and then
Sure.
the well question? Thank you.
Sure. So as some of you probably know, but I don't think many, maybe everybody on this call does, but the RDN has a very sophisticated resident notification system called Voyant. It's a software that basically we can go into our map. The GIS group can go into a map, draw a circle around it, and send an email out, a message out to everybody in that circle who's registered in the Voyant for the Voyant alerts, which you do on our website. And so we drew the circle around your neighborhood, and we only got 42 people, I think, out of the 157. So there's a lot of people in the neighborhood who haven't registered for the alerts through Voyant. And it's not a thing that we'll send you junk mail on or anything like that. It's strictly for things like this and, you know, watering restrictions, important things from an operational perspective. But if you haven't connected to it, or you know people that haven't, you know, it would be great if you could encourage them to sign up for it. It's not a very, it doesn't impact your privacy, I don't think, much, and it's a super useful tool for getting the word out. So the question, what is the trend of the increase in private wells drilled in the last 5 years? Unfortunately, we don't have access to that data. I guess we could go back and ask the government, the provincial government, because they're the ones who register these wells and could tell us maybe what year they were all done in. Yeah, that data is not really available on a time-based thing. I would suspect, my own personal feeling is that most of the wells in your neighborhood were drilled longer ago than that. And I only say that because we are in regular communication with the well drillers that are around, the well-known ones. And, you know, we've asked them to kind of try and educate people when they call from in your neighborhood and want to drill a well, and educate them on the issues. And in talking to them relatively regularly, we don't hear much about wells being drilled in the neighborhood. So I would say, without any data, my anecdotal evidence would say not that many in the last 5 years.
Thank you. And if I could just add to that question while we're still on it, certainly we have a very visible and effective reader sign at the entrance to the subdivision. I'm wondering if the message that's currently reading reservoir extremely low, which is extremely stressful as people drive one way in, one way out to the subdivision and live around a serious amount of dry timber. Is there an opportunity to use that reader board to hopefully increase the buoyant alert participation?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Is there a means also of the RDN utilizing perhaps a sandwich board at the mailboxes? I'm sure we could find a volunteer, maybe Steve One Man Band, who's joined the meeting, is very involved in the community. I'm sure he wouldn't mind setting up the reader board every morning as he goes by, or I could find another willing volunteer, I'm sure. But really, I think what's important to recognize is that communications directly from operations at the RDN would also include things like wildfire interface warnings, evacuation warnings, earthquake warnings, all of those, that type of information. That is the purpose of the buoyant alert system, is to get critical messages directly from the RDN to residents. So maybe we could build on that. And I think 42 out of 155 is okay, but certainly we want to use this opportunity, I think. And yeah, I just wanted to maybe put that forward. And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, the next speaker order was Doug had a question next. Go ahead, Doug.
Thank you. First, I just want to say, Murray, thanks for putting this in presentation together so that everybody could understand there, especially layman's terms for folks like me. And Leanne, thank you for organizing this so that this, among countless other things there, for the betterment of River's Edge there. So I'm not very good at Zoom. I should have just canceled my hand. Randy basically asked the question I did about, I was shocked how many private reservoirs there were. I thought there was only maybe 2 or 3 for the whole river's edge, but it looked like there was probably 20. Murray, I was just wondering, is there something with the, like obviously nobody can just get a pick and shovel and dig their own well. It's got to be by a certified, qualified company. Is there anything, like I know, what am I trying to say here? Like if you want to spray Roundup, what do you call it? Landscape companies refuse to do it because it's against the rail. Is there something like can be doing like that for drilling companies where they say no, river's edge, there are not to be any more drilling going on there due to low levels that's capable with the RDN?
Yeah, that's unfortunately not, we can't do that because the jurisdiction over who gets to drill wells where belongs to the provincial government. So it would be purely them that would say, hey, no more wells to be drilled in this area. And the only way they're going to do that is if your aquifer is in terrible condition, and your aquifer is actually pretty stable in the long term. So they're not going to be very interested in putting a rule in like that. And honestly, it's pretty rare to see them put a rule in like that anywhere in my digging. But yeah, I don't think we can do that. I mean, we have encouraged the well drillers to try and educate people when they get asked to drill a well there. And we do get the odd phone call from a well driller saying, hey, I got a call about drilling a well in such and such a lot in River's Edge. You might want to go talk to those people. So those are good tips for us. But yeah, we don't really have any way to do it otherwise, unfortunately.
Copy. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. And if I could just add on to your question there a little bit about what's coming up from a commercial and agricultural well registration process, just to confirm, there's a change coming at the provincial level. And Murray, if you could just speak a little bit about that well registration process.
Sure.
And how, mostly I think to identify for residents how it doesn't apply for residential.
Yeah. So in 2016, there was a new provincial law, Groundwater Licensing Act. I'll probably have the word slightly wrong, but at that time there was a requirement put in law that anybody who has a commercial well is required to apply for a license to withdraw the water that they would like to use from that. And it's only people that do it for commercial purposes like farming or stores or whatever. If you have a private well, you're not obligated to license it. That said, all new wells that are drilled are registered, which isn't the same thing, and that's how they show up as those little blue circles on the map. So all the well drillers, when they drill the well, they send the paperwork into the provincial government, and that puts a blue dot on the map. But if you have a commercial enterprise and you're using groundwater, you are required by law to apply for a groundwater license. That said, it started out with a 2-year deadline, and the 2 years got changed to 4 years, and we're coming up on the deadline again, and I'm pretty sure it's going to get changed again. The provincial government has been extremely slow in processing the applications, and the general public, not necessarily around the island, but the general public has been pretty slow at putting in licensing applications as well. And to put it into perspective, in our group at the RDN, we have, I don't remember the exact number, but it's in excess of 20 wells, groundwater wells that we've applied for licenses for. And we applied within the original deadline time, which is getting on for 5 years ago now. And to date, we've received 2 groundwater licenses, and they're for the tiniest, most insignificant water systems that we own. So yeah, the groundwater licensing program, it's a good one. It's really going to be helpful as regions that are short on water need to really establish who gets to use the water when it gets short. Unfortunately, they haven't figured out a way to really motivate people to register and to process the application, so people get some feedback that they're actually in there when they have a license for a certain amount of withdrawal. Those similar laws have been in place for surface water for a long time. Surface water users have a license to withdraw a certain amount of water, and everybody's aware of what they use. And in extreme cases, sometimes the government will tell them you can't take your allocation. There's not enough water left in the river, for instance. That happens in the Little Qualicum quite frequently. So that's kind of where the groundwater licensing thing's at. I think the government meant well, and I think it will be good when they finally get around to processing all the applications and telling people, if you don't put your application in, we're going to turn your water off. That'll probably do it. But so far, not much fruit has grown on that tree.
Okay, thanks, Murray. And the next question is Tim. And then after Tim, we'll go to the question in the chat from Brian's iPad. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, everybody, for setting the meeting up, and thanks, Murray, for your time. I got a couple questions. The leak test was obviously very successful. We found 5 leaks in the system. And I know I don't have a digital readout at my meter itself. How do we conduct that, say, on a yearly basis, so we can, prevent us getting into a stage 4 and get ahead of it in time?
Mhm.
To find the
That-
leaks, that's one question.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It's almost like I set you up for that one. So, the water meters that you have in your neighborhood, they have a series of numbers and a dial that spins. And the dial that spins is, I forget the unit, but it's a fraction of a cubic meter per minute. And then the numbers register like an odometer in a car, and they register in cubic meters. And so the best way to see if you have a leak really is during the non-irrigation season, just before you go to bed, go out there and shine a flashlight down there on the meter at the curb and write the number down. And then before you clean your teeth in the morning or whatever you do first, don't flush the toilet, go down there and check it again. And it shouldn't have moved really. During the night, you typically don't use water. It's a little harder to
I
do
didn't
with
think there was
irrigating
a
season.
digital readout, but I can look again, so.
Yeah, it's not digital electronic, it's digital
Yeah.
old school. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's
And the
a little
next question
harder.
I have, sorry.
There's just one more thing on that. Most of the leaks we find are in people's irrigation lines. Like all these leaks we found in the last couple of weeks were irrigation connections. So they weren't water going into the house. So, you might not have picked that up unless you happen to get it just right with your sprinkling system. So the other way to do that, of course, is when you turn your sprinklers on or your irrigation system on in the summer, leave all your zones off and go look at the meter, and it shouldn't be spinning. And it spins pretty quick when it goes, like that. The guys who are having the 30 cube a day leaks, the meter was just about taken off. It was spinning so fast. So it should be pretty obvious if you look at it while you're using it too.
Okay. I live at 715 River's Edge, so I'm up on the hill,
Hmm.
right at the end there. So my water pressure is about 30 PSI.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, is it law to have 50 PSI at the hydrants?
That's a good question.
Because I think I have 40 PSI at the street.
I'm not sure what the NFPA standard for hydrant pressure is. The thing is about hydrants and fire trucks is, and I'm not a fire person by any means, but I'm an engineer. And I can tell you that fire trucks suck on hydrants. And as long as there's water there, the fire truck will pull it out. So that's not an issue. What's an issue is in a lot of older systems that don't have any water pressure, when the fire truck hooks onto the hydrant and sucks on it, it pulls the pipes apart. But you have nice new pipes, so you won't have that issue. So I don't know offhand what the minimum pressure is. It's in our bylaw 500. I could look it up and get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. And I didn't see any of the other hands up, but we did have a question about the accuracy. I do see your hand, Mr. White. So we have a question on the chat about the accuracy of the government information on the wells drilled.
Oh, yeah.
And we have another comment there. It looks that there are about 6 wells that have been drilled since 2015. And so I'm wondering if, I guess the question would be, can we not confirm the accuracy of the wells in River's Edge? So we have that information as part of this process. And please, can we get this information from the province and establish its accuracy?
So the information, the geospatial information on the map is good. So if there's a blue dot there, there's a well somewhere near that spot, usually within a few meters in my experience. So I have no doubt that all the wells that are drilled there are represented relatively accurately by a blue dot. Now, as far as the depth of the well and the production of the well and all that kind of stuff, that's not public information. So I don't know how we could get that information. Like the well logs are not available to the public.
Is that perhaps a policy opportunity at the RDN to create policy for wells within water system areas that need to also record usage and volume of water extracted? Is that something that the RDN could wade into from a policy perspective for preservation and protection of the water system?
I guess if we were in a position to make a rule about that, we probably could, but we don't really have any rules about wells. So,
or is it that the wells are provincial jurisdiction and therefore
it's all provincial jurisdiction? The only thing we can do with it is, we have a rebate for well water testing that for people that aren't on water systems that want to get their wells tested. And those people, when they test their wells, they can agree to share their results with us, which is very helpful, but it doesn't really apply in this case. I I can't think offhand that there's been anybody in the neighborhood that's taken advantage of that rebate.
Right, so that's actually another angle perhaps. What about from a test well perspective? I know there's a number of test wells in the neighborhood. Can you just speak to those test wells and where that information goes and how that feeds into the system? I
Yeah.
think that, yeah, there's a couple of wells that were part of the original production that are now part of the ministry's test wells, and I don't think everybody knows that. Thank you.
Yeah, so the provincial government maintains an observation well network, and that's kind of what they use to map the aquifer levels, you know, all over the province basically. And they're called OW, observation wells. And there was 2 wells drilled as part of the original community water system that were not productive. So they were turned over to the province to use as monitoring wells. And you can see them if you go on the provincial government's groundwater monitoring site. You can see the observation well. I think it's numbered, I might have the number wrong. It's something like 395. It's in your neighborhood, and you can click on that and you can see the trend data for many years on that from a level perspective. And then there's another monitoring well that's not in your neighborhood, but it's a pretty good representation of your aquifer, more towards the Mosaic property out that way on the provincial system. And anytime we have a well in our system anywhere in the RDN that we don't use anymore, we offer it up to the government as an observation well. And throughout our various water systems, we probably have half a dozen wells that we no longer use that the provincial government has instrumented and uses for their own purposes.
Okay, thank you. And just to build on that a little bit, the Drinking Water Watershed Protection 2.0 plan, is there any incentives in that plan? Sorry, I should have brushed up on it for this meeting, but I'm wondering if there's any sort of incentives to bring people into that test well envelope, and maybe there are incentives available perhaps in that plan to you know, bring the well users into the fold so that the information is known about the depth of the well, the volume of water, that sort of thing. Is there any sort of incentives there?
So that hasn't really come up as something that, you know, as a priority exercise to incent people to share their actual well data with us. We get about 95% of the people that take a well water testing rebate agree to share their water quality data with us. So we have, you know, really good water quality profile across all of our water systems because, you know, we basically pay most of the cost of getting a full scan done on their water from these private wells. So there's nothing to stop people in your neighborhood with private wells from doing that. As I say, I don't think anybody has, but to the best of my knowledge, we haven't contemplated getting level data from these people. I'm not sure we'd actually be allowed to do that, but certainly it's something we could talk about.
Thank you. And so next I have Mr. White, and then I see a hand from the Englands, Tim and Lindy England, and then Tim Palmer's hand is up. So in that order, please. Mr. White. Sorry, Randy, you're just on mute.
Love that mute button. Murray, when was the original system, the total system of providing water in River's Edge built? And was it built for 157 properties? And given now that in the last, I would say last 5 years, some bigger houses, well, they're all large, but good sized houses have been built, and even small orchard and trees have been, many trees and shrubs have been put up. Is the original system really capable of handling this in the future? And given, that's one question. The other half of that is, given that there are restrictions in place right now, and there probably will be throughout the years, do the folks who have wells, are they restricted as well? Or do they just have maybe carte blanche approval to use as much water as they feel like, whilst other people who don't have wells are on restrictions? So it's a two-part question, I guess.
Sure. So your water system was built in 2004, and it was designed with the entire community in mind. So it was designed to service full build out of the community as identified. So, you know, there's a few houses on a couple of corners. There's some subdivisions that aren't part of your water system that look like they probably should be, but they aren't. So those ones don't count. But yeah, it's designed for the full build out of the 150, whatever it is, lots. And it's properly designed, like the pipe is the right size. The reservoir has got more than ample storage from the fire underwriters code perspective. It's the right size pipe to make sure that they can pull water into through the hydrants to fire trucks and things like that. So, you know, I don't think at the time, I can't speak very knowledgeably about this, but at the time in 2004, I suspect they didn't design it as if every house was going to get a double allotment of water from what is normal. I think it's designed to, you know, each lot has enough water and water allocation for a single family dwelling. And I'm pretty sure that was the concept it was built on. But as I say, you know, we don't normally have trouble keeping up with the water quantity. At the peak in the summer, we run 80 to 90% run times on our wells. And, you know, it goes down to a lot less than that in the winter. So it's essentially triple the water use in the summer. And I know we all get thirsty, but we're not drinking that much water. So there's a lot of water goes into the ground in the summer for sure.
Okay. And what about the restrictions?
So there's no restrictions on private well owners. They can do what they want.
Oh.
That's the plainest language I can put that in.
Well, therein lies part of the problem, isn't it?
Yep.
You know, if you've got wells, if you have an orchard, or as I'm well aware, a person close to me who's got close to 400 to 500 trees. If he has a well, I don't know if he does, and he could be watering that all the time while other houses are on restrictions, right?
Yep. There's a chance he might be a farm, in which case he would, if he had a well, he would have to have a license for it.
No farm.
Yeah. And then we'd know all about it through the groundwater licensing program. But
Yeah.
I'll just add to that. I mean, there's covenants on these properties in River's Edge that are quite comprehensive. And one is no intensive agriculture. And certainly there's different covenants that line River's Edge in proximity to the river versus other areas of the subdivision that are further away from the river. And I think that as part of this exercise and everyone's heightened awareness, because of the drought and because of this challenge, I think it would behoove us to have a community meeting and just review what the initial intention of building River's Edge is or was in a wildlife corridor, and the responsibility that comes with that when you buy into that. So yeah, if that answers your questions, Mr. White, then we'll move on to Tim's question. Is that right? Okay, good.
Yeah, thanks, Murray, Tim England, and Lindy here. Just a point of information, most of the well records are available online to the well set that's in River's Edge.
you can get some of them, yeah.
Yeah, remarkably, the older ones seem to have more complete data and seem to be a little more accurate. The confusion is in the description of the reservoirs that they've provided. They're non-uniform between the different wells, and so you have to interpolate, you know, particularly wells that were drilled 40 feet from each other, and they're calling the same stratigraphic unit, just describing it differently. So you have to make those shifts. But there are a couple of wells that aren't in the right place, and they're just generally placed near the center of the lot.
Yep.
In fact, there's one that's completely out, and it's a duplicate record of another well within the neighborhood. But, you know, over half of these wells were already here before River's Edge came to be.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that earlier. There is a lot of pre-existing wells there.
Yeah, and River's Edge community, you know, is this patchwork that's influenced by the people who are drawing water from their adjoining lots. And, you know, it's the same reservoir section that's over in those lots. So whatever we do in River's Edge for conservation, you know, we would want to encourage our neighbors to be sort of thing. And in general, I'm sure they are, because their lots are about the size of ours. There may be some differences. For example, the Sleepy Hollow development, which is up the road, top of Peters. at least used to take water from down near Rascal Lane and truck it up there to supply their potable water system. So, you know, there's some complexities to it. The surprising thing to us, we've only been here since 2015, is the number of new wells that have been drilled that are in River's Edge and part of this community that we're living in, which are, you know, against the building scheme. And, you know, half dozen of those, especially on the west side of River's Edge, have been drilled, you know, 2015, 2017, 2019, 2020. I think that pressure will continue. So that's a challenge for us as a community going forward. Just wanted to point that out. But yeah, most of these well records, they're online. If you get lost trying to find the web page, send me an email. I can direct you.
Yeah, I know there was a lot of time and effort spent before my time at the RDN working with a friendly resident to try and enforce the covenant. And I think the potential costs, legal costs, because the person decided to fight it was more than anybody was willing to pay. I wasn't around at the time, but certainly that was an effort was made at that point in time to address some of these wells that are being drilled. And it also highlights the need, you know, for effective soil management. If you're gardening in that area, there's a reason why there was 2 or 3 gravel pits in there before anybody built a house. It's pretty high quality gravel and sand in that neighborhood. It drains, the water drains through there like fantastic. So, you know, you definitely need to get some soil in there if you're going to grow stuff.
Yeah, thank you, Tim, for that question as well. And that leads me to another question that it just keeps coming up. It's connected to the fire protection. It's connected to the size of the reservoir. So in your capital plan, you talked about addressing the supply issue and the quality issue. But I kind of read between the lines that the reservoir that we have servicing the community is it's adequate for fire protection, but how adequate is it for climate change? And just knowing what I know about water storage or lack thereof in the Mount Arrowsmith biosphere from a bigger picture perspective, is there would there be other recommendations and opportunity for additional water storage, which in the future may prevent something like this stage 4 from happening?
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, this stage 4 was you know, was a result of, you know, not having enough supply. There's plenty of reservoir capacity. So, you know, none of the building codes that we build, that neighborhoods are built by today, would require a substantially bigger reservoir than what you have there. I guess, you know, if the community wanted to have a more bigger reservoir for some reason, they'd have to pay for it, and we'd be happy to build it. But you know, that's not certainly not a priority in our capital plan. I mean, the capital plan identifies maintenance to the reservoir to keep it in good operating condition and eventual replacement. But at the moment, we have no reason to believe that we need to make it bigger. And from a climate change perspective, when you're looking at that, it's really the climate change impacts on water systems are almost exclusively focused on the supply side when there is already adequate reservoir capacity. So there's some timing on the supply side where, you know, maybe your wells don't work very well in the summer, so you need to have a great big storage somewhere, or, you know, the climate change is such that your withdrawal amounts from your wells has to be reduced so that it takes longer to fill your reservoir, so you need an even bigger reservoir so it doesn't go empty. We're not seeing any of those in your neighborhood at this point in time. I say our big problem that we're focusing on in your water system is the quality side, and that's just to ensure that the water continues to be potable, you know, from a chloride perspective, a salinity perspective, because if we have to end up treating the water for salinity, it's going to be extremely expensive and complicated, and, you know, it's a lot better to spend money to avoid that than it is to wait till it happens and then throw bucketfuls of money at it. That's kind of where the sort of the plan for capital in your area is going at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I do not see any other hands up or questions. And oh, I do. Sorry, Tim, I forgot you. Go ahead. It happens.
It's okay.
And then I see your hand, George. Thank you.
Yeah, I apologies for being naive on this. I have to say, I was a bit surprised at the amount of private wells, and I was wondering, one, why would you have a private well unless you are sort of into agriculture or, you know, you've some major needs, when you have a system? Okay, you've got community system. And I guess the concern I have is that really there's no way that you know, or correct me if I'm wrong, how much water is being pulled up privately. I assume that counterbalance, it goes around, does that get paid for through utilities, or is that it's free water, I guess,
Yep.
which is why people do it. But I just find it a bit strange that you have a community system, and yet you equally have a lot more than I thought. We've lived here about 10 years, I guess, a lot more than I thought of private wells. And it's really quite concerning that really there's absolutely no control over that, other than registering a well in terms of the volume it's pulling up, presumably from the same source. And that I've found very surprising, and I really appreciate this meeting, because seeing that the amount of private wells, you know, we can all turn off our irrigation, but can you tell whether a private well is leaking? I mean, I don't know much about wells, but is that something you would have been able to detect if there was a well that was not functioning properly and was leaking and causing us further problems?
Yeah, so most of the wells that we're talking about, they're not, they're pumped wells, so they don't flow when the pump's not running.
Okay.
So the private wells, I mean. And we have absolutely no information on what those people are using their well for, or how much water they're using. You know, maybe a drone flight over the neighborhood looking for the green lawns this week would probably be a good place to find that. But yeah, we have no insight to that at all. And they obviously don't pay for the water. They pay the $25,000 or $30,000 to put the well in, and they can use the water forever, basically for free.
Thank you. Sad, but thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you, Tim. Go ahead, George. You just have to unmute, and you're quite dark, but I think we'll be able to hear you. Go ahead.
Let's just we just turn the lights off in here so we can see you on a big screen. But you don't want to see me anyway. So just a couple of questions actually. One of them was, where does the water come from that feeds our aquifer? Is that river water? Is it the Aerosmith Reservoir up on Aerosmith there that kind of feeds our aquifer, or is that being taken out farther downstream to feed Parksville and whatnot, like from the Englishman River? But do we? Is it just percolate up? You know, it's got to come from somewhere, right?
Yeah, so it's pure groundwater you're getting in your system. That's what the hydrogeologists think in the modeling that they've done. They've said there's not a high degree of connectivity between your aquifer and the Englishman River.
George, I'll just get you to mute because we have some
aquifers.
I'll have a go at answering or commenting on your comment anyway. Hopefully you can hear me. I got a bit choppy there, but the hydrogeologists, their work would indicate, and the government's records would indicate, there's not a lot of known connectivity between the aquifer that we draw water from and the Englishman River. So obviously there's going to be some, but the water that you have then in that aquifer is pure groundwater that, you know, it comes into the system as rain in the upper parts of the watershed, and it very slowly filters its way down slope and ends up there in your aquifer where you can pump it out, and eventually it heads up to the ocean. So the speed that water moves through the ground underneath you is incredibly slow. So, you know, this won't be a great example, but if you run a sprinkler in your neighbor's yard, by the time it gets to the well under your property, it could be 2 months later. Like, you know, it's very slow moving the water in the aquifer. So I'm not a hydrogeologist, but you know, you're probably not drinking water from, you know, the last that fell as rain in the last few years at this point. it's older water than that. So the hydrogeologists think that your water is largely just rain or snow melt, but anything from the upper watershed. and it's not connected to the Arrowsmith Dam capture area either.
Thank you, Murray. And George, I think you had another question. If you wanted to unmute, ask your question, and then mute yourself again, we can give it a go.
So you've said that that this whole presentation is going to be available for us to look at again somehow, somewhere. The one slide, I was just wondering what the slide with all the wells on it, the one that's causing all the concern, whether that's going to be on that recording as well.
That's actually from the provincial government's GWells website. So you can get that. Anybody can get that.
Go ahead, Murray. We're good now.
Okay. So that graph or that plot I showed with all the blue dots, that's just a screenshot from the provincial government GWells website. So that information is public. Anybody can get it, and you can zoom in on it and zoom out, and yeah, it's freely available. Obviously, it's in my presentation too. You can see it there, but you'd be better off looking at it online. It's you can move around a bit more there.
Yeah, perhaps we could just add the link to the PowerPoint, and I'm happy to distribute that across the different means.
Yeah, okay.
There's a few of us that have the link already. We'll get that out there. Certainly, yes, the meeting is recorded, and the fact that we've talked about it now for 4 minutes means that people will probably go there and have a look. So that's great.
Yeah.
So did we have any other questions? It says Darren. Randy, yeah, one question, then we'll go to Randy. Go ahead. And you're just muted. There you go.
Hi. Sorry, I'm Shirley. Just question for Murray. Is it a reservoir problem or an aquifer problem that put us into stage 4?
So
and there's another part to the question.
Okay. Now I'll get that one out of the way first. So it was a well problem that got you into stage 4. So the wells, deep holes in the ground, lots of water down there. We pump that out and you send it up to the reservoir, and the reservoir provides the pressure for the water to get to your house. So the usage was so high that we couldn't actually maintain the level in the reservoir with our well pumps because we were leaking so much water. So the problem was, I guess you would say the problem was with the wells because they couldn't keep up to all the leaks, essentially. So the reservoir is a symptom, not the cause.
Okay. So assuming, so there's a lot of wells in the area, which, you're saying that it's not an issue because the aquifer has more than enough water to supply the region, even with, I guess, the private wells. So, I mean, assuming everybody's using their private wells for irrigation, I would assume if they're paying that money to put in the well, if we didn't have all those private wells in the area, would our reservoir meet the demands of the neighborhood, or would we have this issue just from, regular watering or irrigation or household use? Do you know what I'm trying to ask? Like,
I think you're maybe confusing reservoir and aquifer, maybe.
Okay.
So the aquifer is in the ground, and that's where the water is stored until we pump it out and put it in our reservoir, which is the big green tank on the hill.
Right.
So there's no doubt that if there weren't any private wells pulling water out of that aquifer for irrigation or whatever, we probably wouldn't be in such a rush to spend a whole bunch of money on making sure that the quality of your water is sustainable, because it's the rate that the water is withdrawn from that aquifer that's causing the increase in mineralization in the water, which is causing us to have to drill some more wells ourselves till we can address that issue. So no doubt in my mind, I'm not an expert in the aquifer, and I'm not the guy who gets to say it has enough water in it for everybody or not. That's the provincial government. But if there weren't those people pulling water out of the aquifer that we want for drinking water, it would be a lot better for everybody from a drinking water perspective. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Randy, go ahead. And you're on mute still.
I'm mute. I got it.
There you go.
Mary, I find it quite a contradiction, actually, that many houses have restrictions, but those with wells have unlimited use of water at any time. It's really quite a contradiction for an area like this. But my question is, several years ago, I contacted the RDN about trying some projects possibly in here on gray water conversion systems. There's a lot of gray water going into the septic, but could be converted for use on properties.
Mhm.
Is that something that your department looks at or doesn't feel it's worthwhile?
Well, I guess we're a utility provider for one, so we don't really look at that so much. It's more the building industry that would look at that. But I do know that the building code now in BC recognizes gray water collection and reuse. So it's possible to build a gray water collection system that is code compliant in your house, which wasn't the case a few years ago. So that is possible. And I know there's at least 2 houses in the Noose that have retrofitted gray water collection into their house, and they use the water for irrigation. So it's definitely possible. I don't think there's anything kind of new or novel about it anymore. It's just a question of it being a lot easier to do when you first build your house than to retrofit it in after the fact.
It's used a lot in the Arab Republic, so I had the opportunity to look at some of them.
Mhm.
So maybe we could approach Leanne and tell her to get us some rebates or something for those who want to convert to a gray water system.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's impossible. I mean, rebates for gray water reuse is probably a reasonable thing. We could approach that. I mean, the rainwater collection or rainwater harvesting rebate that the RDN does is extremely popular. It sells out every year in most of the drier parts of our region, Gabriola, Yellow Point, places that are really suffering for water. Those rebates are snapped up. There's waiting lists, multi-year waiting lists for those in those areas. So it's worth mentioning to that, when we get into the subject of what rebates we're going to build up. I think it's a good suggestion.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I certainly think as a follow-up of this, you've mentioned the 2 RDN Get Involved websites that detail out all of the soil rebates available and the programs that are available. And I think that if I'm not mistaken, we don't have a large uptake in River's Edge for those programs. We don't have a large uptake in G at all. And so certainly there's some more work to happen there as well.
Free soil,
So-
that's a good one.
Free soil, yeah. Lasts a couple years. So was there any other questions? I don't see any. I don't see any others in the chat. Oh, there you go, George. Go ahead.
May I say something else?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay,
Go ahead.
thank you. So just in this fire prevention thing, not fire prevention, but if there was a fire up here and the tankers, like you say, they pull the water out of, it's not pumped into their system, they suck it out of our system. If our pumps that are in the wells have burnt out, which was a concern during all this, if they burn out and they're not pumping water up into the reservoir fast enough that they're sucking water out, then that can create a real problem at some point down the road too, right? If our pumps can't keep up to that draw, especially like the forest fire. Yeah, the RDN pump. No, that's within our system here. Anyway, just wondering whether there's like backup pumps that, but if there's no water over top of the pumps that burn them out, then they're all going to burn out probably.
So the issue of wildfire and whatnot is a little bit out of my league, but I did take the opportunity to speak with our fire folks today because I thought there might be some questions about that. And I learned that there's when it comes to interface fires, there's an instant mutual aid agreement between all the fire services in the area. And they have and I'll have the lingo wrong on this, somebody will know the right answer, but it's like a tanker shuttle rating or something where they can, through the mutual aid thing, they can shuttle enough water into any of the areas to sort of make the original water source unnecessary, if I could say it that way. Like they have this shuttle scheme built up through mutual aid where they mobilize tankers and they just start rolling tankers into the neighborhood that needs it. And that's a major part of the wildfire resilience and response plans that are in place at the RDN. And they're, that's what this thing in August is all about, is is continuing to develop those and getting more input from people who live in those areas. But they were quite certain when I spoke with them today that, you know, this instant mutual aid thing around water shuttling is common. It's been proven. And, you know, their final comment was, yeah, fire hydrants, that's a great area to live. So again, I'm not a fire guy, but that's what they told me.
Thank you, Murray. We have another question in the chat, and it's from Marilyn Johnson. So the apparent issue in our area is private wells that access and use the water with no limits or controls or fees other than drilling costs. So what is the solution going forward to address this, and what action can be taken by whom?
I can tell you from the RDN's perspective, we've prodded the fabric of this question enough that we're not going back there. You know, I think there's a pretty significant amount of money been spent on legal opinions on how this can be addressed. And really, you know, the covenants on your building scheme are the only tool in the arsenal until at some point, if the aquifer gets so depleted that it becomes an aquifer at risk, then the provincial government may step in and tell them all to stop using their private wells. But you know, that's something that may or may not happen some point in the future. So realistically, the only thing you've got, sort of the only weapon you've got to use against people with private wells is to go after them from a building scheme perspective, because they're very clearly not allowed in your building scheme.
Great. So just to clarify what that means, because we're not all bylaw officers or building inspectors, when you say building scheme, do you mean civilly or through the RDN? What does that look like?
So civilly. So it's kind of a neighbor to neighbor thing. You have to go after the people in civil court to enforce the clauses in or the covenants in the building scheme for the neighborhood. And you know, other people other than me went around up and down and sideways on this with legal advice previously, and they reached that same conclusion a couple of different times.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I know that there has been some work on this, certainly before I even considered running for election. We had numerous conversations about this, and further again, I'm not a legal expert on this by any means, but the reality is a civil suit would require more than 51% of the properties on the same covenant to take that forward in order for it to be considered. So it is a big undertaking, and it does pit residents against residents, which is never a good thing. So just on that note, you mentioned that if we had an aquifer at risk classification, that we may have some difference. There may be some other option. I thought that the layer of brackish water over top of the drinking water aquifer that we were pumping out of actually insured or has listed the aquifer at risk. Is that not true? The aquifer that we are 219 is not at risk. Is that correct?
To the best of my knowledge, it's not at risk. It's a moderate productivity, low risk for contamination, and moderately exploited. I don't think it's an aquifer at risk at this point.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
I'm not an aquifer expert either, but that's what I read when I look at the documents from the government.
Okay, and was there any other questions that we had? And Marilyn, I'm sorry, if that doesn't answer your question, please feel free to put more information into the chat. And I do not see any other hands. And I would like to provide the opportunity for Ms. Tien to say anything in the meeting if she'd like. She can certainly have the floor. Certainly, it's been a pleasure for me working with Ellen in the last couple of weeks. Her responsiveness on emails is impressive. And certainly I'd like to provide her the opportunity to say anything now if she'd like. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Leanne. Yeah, just very happy to be here. This is my third week. Yeah, the third week joining RDN. I used to work in the city of Edmonton, and I've been there for 14 years. And so just recently joined RDN, and yeah, Murray did an excellent job preparing all the slides and answer all the questions. It's just awesome. And he's way much more knowledgeable than I do. So I learned a lot as well. So Yeah, one of the residents mentioned, for example, gray water reuse, that sort of thing. And it just made me to think, because as I said, I came from Edmonton, and I know University of Alberta, there has been the professor is still there. Is very good at doing, even turn black water into potable water. So her scientific research is awesome. But when I think about that, I was thinking, well, for one thing, black water means basically the sewage come from even toilets, right? So the technology nowadays can turn that and treat it to a way that you can drink directly. And actually, it's already been for more than 10 years in Netherlands. They have a neighborhood for more than 2,000 residents. They have very limited water supply, and they treat it to the degree that they can reuse. But when I look at the entire thing, it may not really apply here because, as Maury mentioned, right? So the mid-level aquifer is in very good, healthy condition, and even the lower level aquifer is a high in salt, in minerals, in chloride. I think even for treatment costs, it can be a whole lot cheaper just to treat it than trying to reuse, right? However, really depends. I think that's Randy asked the question, right? So if we just take green water and slightly treat it so that it can go back to irrigation rather than potable and drinking water, so the cost may be different. It's just a whole bunch of scientific and technical questions we have to answer, and then before we really go there. But that's a very interesting topic. So other than that, I have nothing else. And thank you so very much. And thank you, Leanne, for organizing this, and that we have the opportunity and really to answer your questions and concerns.
Well, thank you for coming. And I do see another comment in the chat, and I'll just mention it. And it's Steve One Man Band. I don't even know Steve's last name. That's his Facebook handle. But he's offering to anyone in the neighborhood that he can show you how to check your meter for water leaks, and he's happy to do that free of charge. And certainly in my experience, that is representative of that awesome neighbor that we have here. Certainly he's highly involved and really educated. He's also got a lot of experience because he's one of the first residents that moved into River's Edge here. So he's got a ton of knowledge on how it is we've grown as a community here. So I just wanted to provide a bit of a wrap up, because I think that you know, it's really, I'm very grateful for everyone that attended this meeting, and I'll be very grateful for everyone who attends this meeting to continue to chat this up with everyone in our neighborhood. It is a huge challenge for me, representing such a big area for Area G. And being a communications professional in my former life, to not just have an email distribution list that I can hit go and get information to everybody all at the same time. So I really do rely on the neighborhood to help me communicate what we need to know about things like this. So from a wrap-up perspective, I think this is what we've learned and what I heard, that we're going to hopefully change the name of the water system to the River's Edge water system, so that the confusion about it, whether it's Parksville or Englishman River water system, I think that's actually an important step, because people that move into this neighborhood who don't even know really where the water comes from, they wouldn't know where to go on the website to find information about it. And so I think that it just makes sense that it's a closed system. It was built to the subdivision. The subdivision's named River's Edge. I think that will be a good change, and it'll make lives easier moving forward. Second, we talked about the reader board, and I think that to achieve 50% reduction in water consumption in this neighborhood when it moved to stage 4 is a massive accomplishment. And if the reader board has like a ticker, can we thank residents for contributing to that success? Because this has been extremely stressful for people. You know, having, you know, people drive by the sign, you know, do we have fire protection? should I have someone come in and cut down my trees now? All of the questions around, you know, having living in an area with all of a sudden not being able to use water to keep things alive, to create a fire buffer around these homes that are surrounded by forests, by sprinkling grass. You know, it's not really all about having a green lawn when you live in River's Edge. And certainly I've heard that loud and clear from people, that it came on so fast that, you know, that's a concern. So really I'll be looking for those opportunities to yeah, hopefully use the reader board. If there's a Voyant sandwich board, if we can get everybody on that communications network that the RDN has, I think that will be certainly helpful moving forward. And then I think by sharing this presentation, including links and educating the community on wells, I know that I have personally spoken to someone who purchased a house with a well and thought it was, and the real estate agent promoted it and said it was great, that you could do all your irrigation for free. And so, you know, that that's not ideal, and that's also not intentional from the people who purchased that house, not having that information. So how do we educate people on that, I think is going to be important. And then really keeping a really close eye on, I think, what the capital plan looks like, and ensuring that residents are brought along on that journey so they can understand what the system needs to continue to be robust and sustainable. And so that anytime a regional district water utility receives upgrades or requires additional capital, the funding must come from the residents who benefit from that service. That's according to the Local Government Act. There's no magic pool of money that gets distributed amongst these capital projects. That's how the RDN works, is it has to fully fund upgrades in order to proceed with them. And there is a healthy reserve that is in place for the water system, and it is a newer system, and so certainly I think that the RDN has been doing a good job of building that reserve as well. So it's not like we don't have anything there to work with, but I do think a lot of people also don't understand how the Local Government Act works from a funding for service delivery perspective, and that will also be important. So if there's a hand up, if I've missed anything from a summary perspective, I think we'll all be holding our breath until Wednesday. Well, not really, but we're really hopeful that Wednesday, that either the rest of the RDN goes to stage 4 in solidarity with River's Edge, or that we can move back to stage 3 and lessen our stress level on creating that buffer around the homes for having, you know, the 10-foot swath, the 20-foot swath of not crispy, dry stalal that increases the chances, and potentially looking at what does one day of water sprinkling look like or whatnot, to help us get through this drought summer. So if there aren't any other questions or comments, I think I'd like to wrap it there. And certainly there will be follow-ups in the next couple days coming out. And I will give the last word to Murray and thank him so much for putting this together, really short notice, and all of the work that he's been doing to get us through this. And Murray, if you wanted to have the last word, please go ahead.
Thanks, Leanne. I don't get the last word very often in any of the venues that I get to work in. So I'll take it, even at home here. Yeah, just, you know, it's great to get the opportunity to talk to people who live in the neighborhoods that we provide utility services to. I always enjoy the chance to talk to people who live in the neighborhoods. We learn a lot about how we can improve our services and that kind of thing. So, you know, anytime that there's any kind of neighborhood event that's going on and you want somebody to come and talk to you about your water system, I'm more than happy to do that. So thanks for everybody who came, and you know, I'm sure we're going to get through this pretty soon and get back to what we call normal. Hopefully it might rain one day. So thanks a lot again.
That's great. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your evening, and you'll sign up for Voyant, and we'll keep the information going on Facebook and do a better job of collecting email addresses as well. So there you go. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.